I was never supposed to know about this thing they called the Horny H Club. It was the kind of dirty little secret folks would only murmur about in low voices, hidden away behind closed doors, until I happened to uncover the whole ugly truth. It turned out my wife, Hannah, wasn't just getting a little friendly with the guys in our unit. No, she was actually sleeping with every last one of them. And the kicker? They had a group chat where they'd shamelessly brag, tossing around details. Hell, they'd even come up with a name for their disgusting little group. That was my breaking point. I knew I had to burn the whole thing to the ground. In one brutal, no-nonsense meeting, I laid it all out, exposing her lovers, each and every one of them. But the sweetest piece of revenge? It wasn't just watching her face drop in front of everyone. It was what I whispered to her after, the little detail about my own secret involving one of their wives. So, where do I even begin with all this? I'm 40 now, been serving in the military for over 2 decades. It's a disciplined life, to say the least. Every day starts before dawn, and there's always a set way to do things, lots of yes, sir, and no, sir, back and forth. I've been stationed in all kinds of places, seen things I wouldn't ever want to share, but this has been my world so long that it's hard to imagine doing anything else. Maybe impossible. And then there's her, Hannah, my wife. She's 36, and I'll admit it, she's stunning. She's one of those women who walks into a room, and you can feel everything go quiet. People just stop to look at her. But she's more than just a pretty face. She's smart, ambitious, driven. She's a secretary in our military unit. And let me tell you, that can complicate things. We do our best to keep the work stuff and home stuff separate, but when you're both around the same people day in and day out, it gets tricky. People start to notice things, whispering about you behind your back. I'm used to it, though. It's part of the deal. We've been married 12 years now. Got 2 kids together, a boy and a girl. Those kids are my whole world, the only thing that keeps me grounded some days. Anytime I feel like going off the rails, they're the reason I don't. Being away from them on deployments is brutal. You miss all the little moments. Their first steps, school plays, birthdays. Right now, they're still young enough that they get excited every time I come home, but I wonder how long that'll last. Now, let me tell you, being in the military and having a wife in the same unit can mess with you in ways you'd never expect. When you're working and living in the same place, you end up seeing each other in every role possible. I see her at home, relaxing in her sweats while she's goofing around with the kids. Then, the next day, she's in her work attire, all put together, hair pulled back, sitting behind a desk and handling classified documents like it's no big deal. It's strange, to be honest. It messes with the boundaries. Sure, we love each other. That's never been the issue. But the stress that comes with this job, the endless hours, the deployments, the pressure, it wears you down in ways you don't see coming. Life starts feeling like a grind after a while, if I'm being honest. We don't argue all that often, but when we do, it's usually over something small that's been bubbling under the surface for weeks. She's told me I'm emotionally closed off sometimes, and maybe that's true. But it's tough to come back from what I see out there and just snap back into husband and dad mode. She mostly understands, but there's still tension. If I'm being real, our relationship feels like one of those storms you can see off in the distance but can't do anything to avoid. For the most part, we're steady, reliable even, but there's this constant pressure, an undercurrent of stress that doesn't go away. And lately, I don't know, things feel off. We've both settled into our roles as parents, co-workers, partners. But there are times I wonder if we've lost that spark that brought us together in the first place. And then there's the temptation, working closely with people, spending so much time together. There's always someone, right? You start noticing little things. Maybe they laugh a bit too hard at your jokes, or they brush up against you in passing, and before you know it, your mind starts wandering where it shouldn't. I can't lie. I've noticed the attention Hannah gets. Part of me likes it, but another part of me's on edge because of it. I trust her, or at least I thought I did, but I'm not blind. And if I'm being honest, there have been times when I was the one getting those looks. It's a struggle not to let those thoughts creep in every now and then. It was about a year ago when I started noticing the cracks in our relationship, little things I didn't really want to confront. At first, it was easier to ignore them, brush them off like they weren't there. But eventually, it became this constant, nagging buzz I couldn't shut out. The first real wake-up call came during a briefing. I was seated a few rows back, just another routine day, when I caught sight of Hannah at the front of the room, leaning over a desk to talk to one of the sergeants. Hayes, if I remember right. She was laughing at something he'd said. That easy, full-bodied laugh of hers that's usually reserved for close friends. But then I noticed how she gently touched his arm as she walked away. It was subtle, almost too casual, but I know her well enough to catch when she's being a bit overly friendly. At that moment, I try to shrug it off, telling myself it was just part of her job. She's a secretary. After all, she interacts with everyone, right? Then, another time in the hallway, I happened to see her surrounded by a couple of younger officers. Lieutenant Price was there along with a few others. She was right in the center of it, holding their attention like she was the star of the show. Price, in particular, was standing a bit too close, looking at her as if she was the only person in the world. I couldn't make out their conversation, but judging by their laughter, you'd think they were hanging out in a bar, not on base. She had that flirty energy going, laughing at every little thing they said, tossing her hair back, giving them the kind of smile that, once upon a time, was only meant for me. That one stung deep. Each time, I'd try to brush it off, convincing myself I was overthinking. But it kept happening, like the time I swung by the office to grab some files and saw her chatting with Captain Turner. I don't know what they were discussing, but she was standing a little too close, letting out that soft, teasing laugh of hers. I noticed the way he looked at her, like he was absolutely captivated. And just as I was walking out, I caught her giving him this quick, playful wink. That wasn't the kind of interaction you'd label as just business. I know the difference. I've even tried to talk to her about it, easing into the conversation like, "Hey, you seem to be getting pretty close with the guys." She always shrugs it off, telling me she's only being professional, that she needs to maintain good rapport with the whole unit because it's part of her role. And I get that, sure. But there's a line, and it feels like she's been crossing it more and more lately. It's not just one moment. It's all these little instances piling up. The way she acts around these other men, it's too comfortable, too familiar. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe I'm just imagining things. But it doesn't feel like nothing when I see her laughing and touching another man's arm, acting as if it's the most natural thing in the world. And here's the worst part. I can't even bring it up without sounding insecure or possessive. She'd just flip it around, calling me paranoid or saying I'm making too much of it. And maybe she's right. Or maybe I'm just noticing things that neither of us wants to acknowledge. Either way, the cracks are real, whether she wants to see them or not. I did my best to handle things the right way from the start. I'm not the type to lose my cool without at least trying to talk things out, especially when we're in a military setting where professionalism is expected. So, after watching those interactions with Hannah, I decided it'd be best to pull a few of the guys aside for a quiet chat. Hayes, Price, and Turner. With Sergeant Hayes, I kept it casual. After a training session, I brought it up as if it were nothing, just a passing thought. "Hey," I said, "everything good between you and Hannah? You two seem to be getting pretty close." He gave me one of those quick half smiles, almost too quick as he brushed it off. "Oh no, man," he said. "We're just co-workers. I've got nothing but respect for her, and for you too. It's nothing." He sounded genuine enough, so I left it alone, but there was something in the way he dismissed it that didn't sit right with me. Then there was Price. Now he's young, still trying to make his mark, so I figured maybe he didn't realize how it looked. I caught him in the break room and kept my tone light but firm. "Look, I've noticed you and Hannah talking a lot. I'm not saying you're crossing any lines, but maybe he's up a bit, yeah?" He apologized on the spot, saying, "I'm sorry, man. Really didn't mean anything by it. She's just easy to talk to, you know? Didn't think it was an issue." He sounded sincere enough, but the way he avoided eye contact told me he knew exactly what I was getting at. Then there was Captain Turner, and that was where things really went south. I'd already had a couple of tense interactions with him before, so I walked into this one braced for a rough conversation. After work, I pulled him aside and kept my tone steady, just trying to be direct. I told him that I didn't like how close he seemed to be with Hannah and that I just wanted to be sure things were staying professional. At first, he listened, nodding along, and I thought maybe we'd get through it without a hitch. But then, with this smug smirk, he stepped over the line. "Listen, Mason," he said with this mocking tone, "I respect you as an officer, but maybe Hannah's looking for a little more than what you're giving her." It felt like something snapped in me. All the frustration, the suspicions, the anger, it all just rose to the surface. I stepped right up to him, so close I could feel my fists tightening, ready for a fight, and I asked, "What did you just say?" My voice was low, sharp, barely controlled. Turner didn't back down. He just stood there, that arrogant smirk plastered on his face, and repeated, "You heard me. Maybe she needs more than a guy who's always buried in work, too busy with the military to see what's happening at home. I don't know how I managed to keep myself from decking him right then and there. Every instinct told me to take him down a peg, to wipe that smug look right off his face. But I held back. Barely. If we hadn't been standing on base, I don't know if I would have been able to. I clenched my fists, grit my teeth, but I didn't take the bait. Instead, I threw out, stay the hell away from my wife, then turned and walked off before I did something I'd regret. That was, the point where things turned. After that, I couldn't get Turner's words out of my head. Maybe he was just being a smug jerk, or maybe he was telling me something deeper, something I hadn't wanted to see. Either way, things with Hannah haven't been the same since. Every time I look at her now, I can't help but wonder if she feels the same as Turner does, that maybe I'm not enough for her anymore. I didn't make it to the New Year's party. A military assignment had me out of town, so I wasn't around to see things for myself. Looking back, I wish I'd been there. The rumors started drifting my way about a week after I got back. At first, it was all low-key, whispers here and there, just enough to make my nerves prickle, but not enough to pin anything down. One of the guys from my unit, someone I've trusted for years, mentioned casually that he'd seen Hannah at the party, looking a little too comfortable with Hayes, Price, and a few other guys I barely knew she even talked to. I tried to brush it off. What could I say? Anyway, it's not like she'd just sit at home waiting for me to come back. She had every right to go out, let loose, and enjoy herself. But then, more people started mentioning the same thing. And it wasn't just what they said, but how they said it. Every single one of them had that same look. Like they didn't want to be the ones to spill it, but they felt I needed to know. That's what really started to get under my skin. One night, a bunch of us were hanging out in the barracks, and Garcia, one of the younger guys, started making jokes about the party. He was a few drinks deep, and we all know how the truth slips out when people start letting loose. He threw out a comment about Hannah's little group and how she'd been the center of attention that night. I didn't bite it first, but the way everyone else reacted, laughing awkwardly and shifting uncomfortably, put me on edge. I asked, "What exactly are you trying to say, Garcia?" He clammed up immediately, but the damage was done. Some of the other guys exchanged nervous glances, and the whole room seemed to tense up. Finally, Jenkins, one of the older guys, usually level-headed, tried to smooth things over. Come on, Mason, it's just party talk. People get a little tipsy, things get a bit rowdy. Nothing to worry about." But I could tell he was holding back. Later, after everyone else had left, I cornered Jenkins, needing some straight answers. At first, he hesitated, didn't want to say anything, but after a bit of pushing, he finally gave in. "Look, man," he said quietly, his voice low. "People were talking after the party. They're saying Hannah was really close with Hayes, Price, and a couple of other guys. Closer than you'd probably be okay with." My stomach twisted. "What the hell do you mean by close?" Jenkins glanced around, making sure no one else was around to hear. "You know how these parties get. There's alcohol and music, people start to get a bit handsy. She was with them most of the night, and later on some folks are saying they all might have gone back to someone's quarters together." I just stared at him, barely able to process what he was saying. The room seemed to close in on me, everything suddenly feeling too tight, too close. "Look, I'm not saying anything for sure happened," Jenkins added quickly. "But you know how rumors get started. People see a group leave together, and they start talking. But that was the problem. Rumors don't just start from thin air. Not in a place like this. People saw something, enough to make them talk. Whether it was innocent or not, it didn't matter. It was already gnawing away at me. When I got home, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I confronted Hannah, trying to stay calm, but feeling like I was barely keeping it together. I laid it all out, what I'd heard about Hayes, Price, and the others. She looked shocked at first, like she didn't expect me to find out. But then she turned defensive. "Are you seriously asking me about this?" she snapped. "You know how people gossip around here. I didn't do anything. We were just having fun." "Fun? What kind of fun are we talking about, Hannah?" I shot back. Because from what I'm hearing, it sounds like it was more than just a few drinks and some laughs. She crossed her arms, shooting me a cold look. "You're being ridiculous. You weren't even there, Mason. You have no idea what happened." That stung, and she wasn't wrong. I hadn't been there. That only made it worse. I had to rely on scraps of rumors and secondhand stories because I couldn't see what went down with my own eyes. And the way she was reacting, it wasn't exactly reassuring. We went back and forth for what felt like forever, her insisting that nothing happened, me pushing for details, trying to get any clarity on what really went on that night. In the end, she just stormed out of the room, leaving me there, wrestling with a head full of doubts and a heart full of unanswered questions. The day after that explosive argument with Hannah, I got a message from Lieutenant Price's wife, Emily. I didn't know her well, but we'd crossed paths enough times for me to know it was strange for her to reach out. She told me she needed to discuss something important, asked if we could meet in person. There was something in the way she phrased it, a seriousness that made my stomach twist. I had a feeling this was going to be ugly, but I didn't yet know how deep it was going to cut. We met at a coffee shop off base, somewhere quiet and out of the way. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, dark shadows under her eyes, her hands trembling a bit as she held her coffee. I sat down, and before I could even ask what was going on, she just blurted it out. I found out that Price has been cheating on me, she said, her voice barely steady. With your wife. For a moment, I couldn't even process her words. I just sat there, staring at her, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. With Hannah? I managed to stammer. She nodded, her eyes glistening with tears she was clearly fighting to keep back. I found messages on his phone. Explicit messages. It wasn't just flirting. They'd been sleeping together. It felt like someone had kicked me in the gut. The air seemed to drain out of the room, and I felt my chest tighten. But the worst part? She wasn't done yet. It's not just Price, Mason, she continued, her voice cracking as she looked down at her coffee cup. There's more. A lot more. I sat there in silence, steeling myself. There's a group chat, she went on, her words pouring out faster now. They call it the Horny H Club. It's Price and 5 or 6 other guys. They talk about her, about what they've done with her. The messages, they talk about her like she's some kind of trophy. I felt bile rise in my throat. She pulled out her phone, showing me screenshots she'd taken from Price's messages. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. The things these guys had written, it was worse than any locker room talk, the most degrading of all descriptions. Every single encounter, every rendezvous, laid out in detail like they were comparing notes. And it wasn't just one-on-one. They were talking about group encounters. Group sex. I could barely breathe. They've been meeting up behind our backs, Emily said, her voice filled with a mix of anger and hurt that cut deep. Your wife, my husband, and a bunch of other guys. It's been going on for months. Who knows how long, really? I just sat there, my eyes glued to her phone, my stomach in knots. Words failed me. I couldn't even figure out what to feel. Rage? Betrayal? Shame? It was all hitting me at once. This wasn't just some secret fling. This was a whole twisted game. It wasn't just one guy. It was a pack of them, laughing behind my back while they took turns with my wife. Images flashed through my mind. All those times I'd seen Hannah with Hayes, Price, Turner, and I realized it wasn't paranoia. It had been real, happening right in front of me, and I'd been too blind to see it. Emily leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not telling you this to hurt you, Mason. I'm telling you because I want to do something about it. I want revenge. That word hung heavy between us. Revenge. I didn't even know what that meant in this mess, but I could see from the fire in her eyes that she was dead serious. I have all their names, she said, her voice steely. I know every one of them who's involved. I've got the messages, the proof, Price, Hayes, Turner, and a few others. They all had their turns with her. I'm not about to sit back and let them get away with it. For a while, I didn't say anything. I was too busy trying to hold myself together, keep myself from losing it in the middle of this quiet coffee shop. My head was spinning. What the hell was I supposed to do? Go home and confront Hannah? Storm into the base and tear into these guys? Set my life on fire just to settle the score? Emily must have seen the turmoil on my face. You deserve better than this, she said, her voice softening just a bit. We both do. But I'm not going to let them walk away from this without paying for it. And neither should you. I didn't respond right away. I just nodded, feeling numb, barely able to process everything she'd unloaded on me. Part of me wanted to stand up, walk out, and pretend this nightmare wasn't real. But another part of me, the part that felt humiliated, betrayed, furious, that part wanted payback. Emily slipped her phone back into her bag and stood up, her gaze hardening again. Think about it, she said, her voice cold. We don't have to just sit here and take this. We can make sure they don't get off easy. We can make them pay. Together. And with that, she walked out, leaving me alone with the wreckage of my thoughts. I sat there, staring at the table for what felt like hours, wondering what in the hell I was supposed to do next. I'll be honest with you, revenge was never really my style. But after learning the extent of Hannah's betrayals, after seeing how many people were involved, it became clear that there was no going back. I wasn't about to just sit back and let her and those guys walk away like nothing happened. If I was going to tear my life apart, I'd make sure I took every one of them down with me. A few days after meeting with Emily, I decided it was time to act. There was a briefing scheduled, a full room packed with officers, sergeants, and some higher-ups. I knew most of the Horny H Club members would be there. Hayes, Price, Turner, and a few others. Hannah, too, would be sitting up front, her usual spot, likely thinking she was untouchable. The night before, I'd pulled together everything, screenshots, messages, the whole filthy archive. I was about to put their dirty little secret on full display. As the briefing wrapped up, I stood up and asked if I could say a few words. Nothing unusual. Most of them trusted me, knew I'd been around for years. Nobody saw what was coming. I started off light, throwing in a few jokes to keep things casual. Hey, before we finish up, I've got a story I think some of you might find interesting. Ever heard of the Horny H Club? There were a few awkward chuckles, probably folks assuming it was just some offhand joke. But I wasn't joking. Fun and int, but here's the thing. It's real. Real enough that a few of you in this room are proud members. A little exclusive club where certain guys have been, well, sharing my wife's. The room went absolutely silent. You could feel the shock ripple through everyone. People started looking around, glancing at each other, trying to figure out if this was some prank or if I'd actually said that. Then I went for the knockout. I got proof. Anybody want to see it? I walked up to the screen at the front, plugged in my USB drive, and pulled up the group chat, the infamous Horny H Club. Message after message from Hayes, Price, Turner, and the others. The filth they'd written about Hannah was there in plain text. Every crude, disgusting detail. Gasps filled the room. I watched as faces paled, and the guys involved began squirming in their seats, clearly wishing they could disappear. Price looked like he was about to slide under the table. Hannah? She just sat there frozen, her face drained of color, and she didn't try to deny a thing. She knew she'd been caught. Let's be clear, this is more than a bit of office gossip, I said, my voice steady but with enough edge to let everyone know I wasn't kidding. It's pretty obvious who's been involved. Hayes, Price, Turner. You boys want to say anything? No, didn't think so. The silence was thick. The senior officers up front looked furious, and not just at me. They knew the kind of scandal this was, the kind that ended careers on the spot. I stepped away from the screen, letting everyone absorb the truth. Well, that's enough for today, isn't it? Enjoy your afternoon, fellas. Oh, and don't bother showing up tomorrow. I'm pretty sure your military careers are over. Then I turned and walked out, leaving them all to face the wreckage. Word got around quickly. It didn't take long before Hayes, Price, Turner, and the rest were discharged dishonorably. Hannah, too, was let go without a fight. The scandal was too big, too ugly, to sweep under the rug. But the final piece of revenge came later when I had one last talk with Hannah. She came to me trying to explain, trying to salvage something. But I was done listening. I told her everything. How I'd found out, how Emily had shown me the messages, and how I'd torn down her entire web of lies right in front of everyone. She just sat there, looking shattered, not a word to defend herself. And then I hit her with the last nail. Oh, and one more thing, I said, leaning back with my arms crossed. While you were out there sleeping with half the base, I had a little rendezvous of my own. A few nights, actually, with Emily, Price's wife. Her expression shifted from shock to fury in an instant. And let me tell you, I added with a smirk, she made sure I didn't feel like I was missing out. The realization hit her hard. For once, she had nothing to say. I'd stripped her of everything, her secrets, her reputation. And now, she was left with nothing. I walked out after that, leaving her to deal with the mess she created. To me, that chapter was closed. My life would never be the same, but there was no way I was letting her or any of those men walk away without paying for what they'd done. They'd made their choices, and now they were facing the fallout. And as for me, maybe it didn't fix everything, but damn, it felt good to finally have a last word. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow.